Something detonated inside hip-hop this week, and the shockwave has not stopped rolling. Rick Ross just walked into 2026 dragging a war chest behind him, and the moment the needle dropped on Set in Stone, the entire culture froze in place. This is not a comeback album. This is not a victory lap. This is a 52-minute assassination attempt wearing a Maybach chain, and by the time the last track fades out, 3 of the biggest names in rap are left standing in the wreckage. Drake, 50 Cent, and a shadow list of enemies Ross has been keeping in a locked drawer for a decade and a half. Every rumor you have heard about this project is smaller than the truth. Every warning shot Ross has taken over the last 10 years was quiet compared to what he just did. Because Set in Stone is not a title. It is a threat. And the threat is aimed at everyone who thought the boss had gone soft, everyone who thought the boss had gotten too rich to remember his enemies, and everyone who bet money on the idea that Rick Ross was too polite to swing back. Stay with me, because the next 20 minutes will walk you through every disc, every coded shot, every buried grenade this album is hiding. And by the end you will understand why hip-hop insiders are already calling this the most reckless power move Ross has made in 20 years, and why nobody in Curtis Jackson's camp, nobody in Aubrey Graham's camp, and nobody in the label machine has been able to shape a clean response yet. Before we peel back the first layer, a quick heads up. Everything you are about to hear was pieced together by one person behind one microphone. The writing, the editing, the thumbnails, the deep dive research, all of it. So if you feel the weight of the work, a like and a subscribe genuinely keeps the lights on around here. Now let us get back into the mess, because the mess is where the story lives. Set in Stone opens the way a Rick Ross album is supposed to open. Slow, confident, suffocating in luxury. But underneath the champagne haze, the boss is already sharpening the blade. On the very first proper record, the Caviar intro, Ross signals that this project is not a music release, it is a legacy statement. The line about etching every move he has ever made over the last 2 decades reads polite on paper. It reads terrifying in context. Because the moves he is etching in stone are not just the wins. They are the vendettas. They are the men who tried to bury him. They are the women who were dragged into the crossfire. They are the reporters, the executives, and the rival rappers who thought Rick Ross would eventually run out of runway. He did not run out of runway. He was building a launch pad the entire time. And the first vendetta name-checked on this launch pad, in the loudest possible way, is Curtis Jackson. The 50 Cent situation, for anyone new to this story, does not have a clean beginning and it has never had a clean end. It goes back to 2009, back to the leaked Mafia music session that started the whole thing, back to the era when Rick Ross was still fighting to prove he belonged in the same room as the Queen's veteran. Most people in the audience assumed that fight died a long time ago. Most people assumed both men had aged out of it, that the money was too big, the careers too settled, the culture too tired of the sequel. Set in Stone confirms, in surgical detail, that every single one of those assumptions was wrong. On the record, listeners are already calling the centerpiece of the album, Mahogany Caskets. Rick Ross does not bury the beef. He digs it up and props it in the passenger seat. The chorus alone functions as a live grenade with the pin already pulled, and the opening bar names Curtis outright, not as a rival, not as a colleague, but as a target. Ross is not asking the audience to guess. He is handing them the evidence with a bow on top. The subtext basically reads, "I do not respect you. I never did." And the timing is deliberate. Because 2026 was supposed to be 50 Cent's year of Hollywood dominance, streaming empires, and rap elder statesman victory laps. Instead, Ross has forced Curtis back into a lane he has publicly claimed he abandoned. That is the setup. And a setup this precise is not an accident. It is a career being reopened without permission. The trapdoors keep opening on Mahogany Caskets because the collaborator on that record is T.I., a co-signature that is not casual. Tip has been quietly firing his own shots at 50 Cent for months, and putting the two of them on a track together is Rick Ross telling the streets which side of the war they are booking their travel on. The next flashpoint arrives when Ross doubles down with a line about 4 songs and a woman who has already been dragged into this feud once before. Listeners have been circling that reference for days, and the leading interpretation is that the 4 songs represent the 4 historical disc records Ross has landed on 50 Cent over the years: Mafia Music, Kiss My Pinky Ring, In Cold Blood, and Push Him Over the Bridge. If that reading is correct, and every clue points that direction, then the message is not romance. It is receipts. The boss is telling Curtis that he has already won the war 4 different ways, and this new album is the 5th. Curtis, of course, has his own answer. He has spent years telling anyone with a camera that he never respected Rick Ross, never wanted to work with him, never saw anything worth admiring. He has built entire press cycles on the premise that Ross is a marketing invention, a career-long imposter, a man who wears the streets like a costume. Ross's counter is buried in the album's tone. He does not argue with 50 anymore. He talks past him. He talks over him. He talks like a man who already stepped over the body and kept walking. That is precisely the gravity keeping this album in orbit. Because a diss is only powerful when the person being dissed still matters. Ross clearly still thinks Curtis matters. Curtis clearly still thinks Ross matters. 15 years in, and both men are still hooking their careers to the other man's oxygen tank. Set in Stone does not resolve that dependency. Set in Stone weaponizes it. Now here is where the album stops being about 50 Cent and starts being about someone the streets have been waiting on for 2 years. Drake. The name Drake does not appear on Set in Stone as a feature. That is the first shock. For most of the last decade, a Rick Ross album without a Drake verse felt like a Cadillac without a hood ornament. This one arrives without him, without a proper single rollout, without the machine-oiled promotional theater that usually surrounds a Boz release. Some observers took that as a sign of desperation. The reality is the opposite. Ross removed Drake from the album because Drake is not a guest on this project. Drake is a subject. The first breadcrumb sits on the intro. That line about a champagne toast just amongst my folks lands as a throwaway to a casual ear. To anyone who has been paying attention to hip-hop nicknames for a decade, it lands as a laser sight. Drake has been calling himself Champagne Papi long enough for the name to be tattooed into pop culture. Ross adjusting the toast to amongst my folks is the polite version of a door being closed in Drake's face. Translation, plain and unbothered, you are not folks. You never were. You never will be. That one landed sideways because it arrives before anyone expects the album to get into Drake territory. Ross does not open with a Drake shot. He opens with a boundary. This is my table. You are not sitting at it. And once that boundary is drawn, every luxury flex on the album starts reading differently. Every mention of family, every mention of the streets, every mention of the Miami and Atlanta corridor becomes another quiet reminder of where Aubrey Graham is not from and who Aubrey Graham cannot claim. The next flashpoint arrives on Maybach Music 7. This is where Ross stops hinting and starts detonating. The centerpiece bar is a claim so pointed it made engineers rewind the session more than once. Ross says he has been the nicest since before the other man had a license, that his style has been copied so thoroughly he could sue for likeness. He never says Drake's name. He does not need to. Maybach Music has been Drake's home address for a decade. The two men built Aston Martin music together. They built Stay Schemin' together. They built the entire luxury rap architecture that Drake has spent 20 studio albums furnishing. Ross is not just claiming ownership. He is claiming authorship. He is telling the audience that the artist they thought defined the sound was actually operating inside a house Ross built, from a blueprint Ross drew, on land Ross bought first. Listeners have been circling one line in particular. Ross raps that he wrote a few of the other man's rhymes to show him what it could be. The line is not clean. It is deliberately smudged. Ghostwriting is one of the 2 or 3 most flammable accusations in Drake's career, and every time the topic surfaces, it drags the same ghosts back into daylight. Ross does not confirm which lyrics he claims to have written. He does not need to. He only needs to plant the flag and walk away. The audience does the rest. The subtext basically reads, "Everything you love about him, I gave him. Everything you thought was his, I lent him. Everything he is, I invented." Whether the audience believes that or not, the bar has already done its job. Because in a beef, the person who has to defend themselves loses the news cycle. And right now, the person forced onto the defensive is not Rick Ross. It is Drake. The room is left deliberately unlocked on Ring Around the Rose, where Ross drops a bar about certain names ending up on the Epstein list. In isolation, that reads as a bomb thrown into a crowd. In context, it lines up with a very specific series of interviews Ross has done in the last 6 months, where he has been asked repeatedly about his relationship with Jay-Z, about missing the anniversary concert, about the shifting temperature in the room whenever those two men are in the same building. Ross does not name HOV on the track. He never does. But the placement of the line, the timing of the release, and the peculiar coldness he brought to that specific podcast appearance have listeners drawing a picture the album is happy to let them draw. Call it strategy, call it settling scores, the ledger is open, and Rick Ross is the one holding the pen. And a man holding a pen inside a room full of people who thought the book was closed is a man rewriting the ending. Now the second detonation is a visual one, and this one is not a lyric. This one is a photograph. In the days leading up to the album's release, Rick Ross was spotted at an airport, boarding a commercial flight, sitting in an economy row alone. No security detail. No assistant. No entourage. Just the boss, in a departure lounge, waiting on his zone to be called. Drake fans clipped it. 50 Cent fans clipped it. Pundits circled the footage like sharks. Because Rick Ross is the man who bought a G600 for close to $40 million and painted the interior custom. Rick Ross is the man who mows 400 acres of his own lawn on a John Deere with tinted windows, an AC unit, and a radio inside the cab. Rick Ross does not fly economy. Except this week he did. The reaction was immediate. And it was cruel. Champagne Poppy himself, the man Ross has been quietly dismantling all album, cracked jokes on his own record about Ross flying economy while pretending to be untouchable. That single image handed Drake more ammunition than any diss track could have, and for about 72 hours it looked like the roof was coming down on the boss. Then Set in Stone dropped. And the roof came down on Drake instead. Because that is the trick Ross has been running all cycle. He absorbed the humiliation. He let the internet feast on the airport footage. He let Curtis and Aubrey take their victory lap. And while they were laughing, he was closing the lid on a 52-minute case file with both of their names inside it. Ross did not defend himself in real time. He waited until the album was live. Then he defended himself with the entire tracklist at once. There is a version of that patience that reads as strategy, and there is a version that reads as trap setting. Both are true. The trapdoors keep opening on Big Fish, where Ross finally addresses the ghost that has hovered over his career since Gunnett unearthed those old employment records more than a decade ago. Ross was, for a period in his early adulthood, a corrections officer. For years, that revelation was treated like a career-ending scandal. 50 Cent built entire multimedia campaigns around it. Every subsequent rap adversary reached for the same weapon. Ross's answer on Set in Stone is disarming in its calm. He calls it a job. He explains that inside those walls he helped inmates navigate a dangerous system. He reframes what critics used as a stain and repositions it as a story of a young man doing what he had to do to fund a bigger dream. The tactic is textbook. You cannot be exposed by something you have already exposed yourself. By the time Big Fish ends, that line of attack is functionally dead. Any rapper who tries to swing it in 2026 sounds 15 years late. Then Ross opens a door nobody expected him to open. On what appears to be an interlude sequence, he references a name that has haunted hip-hop for months, Queso. The situation surrounding Queso's father cooperating with authorities is one of the most polarizing stories in the culture right now, and Ross lands on it with the traditional street code he has never publicly abandoned. He calls it what the streets call it. He names no forgiveness. He offers no complexity. And then the audience notices something. Ross's stance on cooperation is inconsistent. Because Gucci Mane, one of the most storied names in trap music, has faced years of the same accusations Ross now aims at Queso's father, and yet Gucci gets a pass in Ross's ecosystem. That inconsistency has become the loudest debate in the album's comment sections. Some listeners are calling it selective loyalty. Others are calling it business. Ross does not answer either camp. And silence in the Ross playbook is almost always intentional. Meanwhile, in the background, a familiar voice is being addressed without ever being named. Gunplay, once one of the closest members of the extended Maybach family, has spent recent years giving interviews that painted Rick Ross in a difficult light. Later, softer clarifications did not undo the damage. Ross's response on Set in Stone is not a diss. It is worse. It is a quiet acknowledgement. He lets the audience feel that he heard every syllable. He lets them feel that he is choosing not to escalate. In a genre built on retaliation, that restraint reads louder than a full-length disc record. It is the kind of move that tells you the boss keeps a longer memory than anyone in his orbit realizes. And then there is DJ Academics. Ross drops him into a bar with almost surgical delicacy. He tells the audience that if they want to know who is running rap today, they should ask AK. The insinuation is that Academics would name Drake and that Ross considers that answer a compliment to no one. In a single line, Ross has drafted both the media figure and his most covered subject into the same box. That is the kind of bar you cannot walk back from, and the kind of bar that keeps the algorithm alive for weeks. The subtext basically reads, "The culture is not what your streaming numbers say it is. The culture is what the block says it is." And the block has never voted for Aubrey. The boss cuts the pretense clean off on Camel Meat, where he raps that he hopes the other man wrote his own rhymes. In hip-hop, that sentence is not a question. It is an execution order. Every rapper alive knows what it means. Every rapper alive knows who it targets. And every rapper alive knows that once that sentence enters the ecosystem, someone is expected to answer. Drake has not answered. Not yet. The Iceman album, released weeks earlier, took its own subtle jabs at Ross, a passing reference to the Boz flying economy, a coded needle about jewelers in Miami running with fake diamonds. Those were fingernail scratches compared to what Set in Stone brings back. And that mismatch is the story of the moment. Because in the marketplace, the numbers still favor Aubrey. Iceman is still perched at the top of the Billboard 200, and analysts on prediction markets are wagering it holds there for another month. But Ross has decoupled his ambition from those numbers on this project. He is not chasing chart position. He is chasing narrative. And narrative is a war he has been winning quietly for a long time. Consider the deeper pattern. Drake's album titled For All the Dogs. Ross rapped years earlier that if he dropped another album, he did it for his dogs. Coincidence, maybe. Homage, possibly. Theft, according to Ross. The clue is not the phrase. The clue is that Ross is bringing that phrase back up right now, in this exact album, in this exact moment. Nothing on Set in Stone is placed by accident. Every syllable is calibrated. Every callback is a receipt. That is what makes this album different from every other rap release in 2026. It is not a music project. It is a chess move. And Ross has planted pieces on the board that will not be triggered until Drake or Curtis makes a move to respond. The genius of the project is that it forces motion. Nobody in the crossfire can afford to stay still, because staying still is confirmation. Which brings us to the question the entire culture is asking. Who answers first? Because someone will. Curtis has already publicly promised to never stop until Ross is buried. Aubrey has an entire team of writers, producers, and marketing budgets sitting on standby. And Ross, from every indication, has 3 more records already loaded for whichever man reaches for the microphone first. Sources close to the Maybach camp have hinted at a bonus track list waiting in the wings, tailored to whichever direction the return fire comes from. Do not confuse silence for surrender. Ross has spent a full decade absorbing shots, the corrections officer leaks, the private life exposures, the constant Curtis campaigns, the Drake distance, the gunplay interviews, the fake diamond jokes, the airport photograph. Set in Stone is what happens when a man stops absorbing and starts returning fire. All of it. In one album. In one summer. In one calibrated 52-minute detonation. By the time the record closes, 3 separate rap careers are being renegotiated. 50 Cent is being pulled back into a battlefield he swore he had left. Drake is being asked to defend an ownership claim on his own sound. And Rick Ross himself is being reintroduced to a generation of listeners who forgot how dangerous he is when he is quiet. That third renegotiation is the sneaky one, because Ross was never gone. He was reloading. Everyone thought the boss had gone soft. Everyone thought the boss had grown too rich to care. Everyone thought the boss was ducking. Set in Stone is a 52-minute correction to all three assumptions, and the correction is written in a font hip-hop cannot ignore. Rick Ross said the title of the album is a message. A message that a boss' moves are permanent. A message that his history, the wins, the wounds, the enemies, is chiseled into a surface the rain cannot wash off. A message that when you come to Miami 200 years from now, Jose will still be there. And a message that when the next round of rap history is written, it will include the summer Rick Ross walked into 2026 with a war chest, an album, and a very specific list of names. Now the floor is yours. Do you believe Ross has truly ended the 50 Cent chapter, or is Curtis about to detonate the biggest response of his career? Do you think Drake will answer the Champagne Poppy line, the ghostwriting jab, and the Maybach Music 7 lawsuit for likeness bar, or is he going to stay quiet and let Iceman ride the charts? And who do you think Ross is really talking to on that Epstein list line, Jay-Z, someone bigger, or nobody at all? Drop your verdict in the comments, because the response cycle is coming, and the person who calls it correctly gets to say they saw it first. If this breakdown pulled you into the story, hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the bell, and stay locked in because the next chapter of this war lands in the next video, and you do not want to walk in cold. The response records are already being written. The industry is already choosing sides. And the summer of 2026 is officially the summer Rick Ross reminded everyone that a boss never asks for permission. He just etches his name into whatever surface he decides is next. Set in Stone is here. The boss is back. And the streets are already picking sides.